Today, we're building this beautiful tic-tac-toe game with React. Hello world, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Igor. I'm a software engineer based in Portugal. And on this channel, we do coding related stuff like tutorials, challenges, and other related topics. So if you are interested in those, please consider subscribing. And today, I'm excited. We'll be building a beautiful web-based version of the game we all love to play during class back at school with our next door colleague on a dedicated piece of paper that we had on our notebook. And that game is Tic-Tac-Toe. On this tutorial, we'll be focusing on the playability of the game. I've also put together a statistics section showing the latest game results and percentages. And if you're interested in developing that section as well, let me know in the comments below and I'll make a video on that later. We will be putting this game together using Next.js, a well-known React framework, together with Tailwind CSS for the stylings. For the setup, you can check out this video I made a while back on the integration of Next.js and Tailwind CSS as a project. Or if you'd like to skip that step of the process, I've also put together a Next.js Tailwind CSS boilerplate repository on my GitHub. You can find the link below for that, and that is a kickstart for you. Since this is quite a complex game, we're going to divide it into two parts. The first part, which is this one I'm doing right now, is just going to be the rendering and the playability of the game. And part 2 is going to be detecting the winner through a combination of detecting the rows and columns which each player played on. So now that we are all ready to go, let's get coding. Okay, so what we have here is an empty version of the boilerplate that I just shared with you. And what we have on the index page is just a div with the hello text on it. I already have this running here in the terminal. So if you go back to Safari on localhost 3000, you can see the web page that I just mentioned. So we're going to start from here. For this one, I'm going to build tic-tac-toe within a component itself where it can handle all the logic. So we can already say that on the index page, we're going to be rendering a component called tic-tac-toe. It doesn't exist at the moment, so we're going to go up to the components folder, create a new folder called tic-tac-toe.tsx, because we're using TypeScript. And we're going to put the boilerplate for the new React functional component. And just say here tic-tac-toe. And if we save, import it back in the index because it's not imported yet. Now we have the text from the tic-tac-toe component. So now we are getting started. So let's start making our component. So we're starting with a div, an empty div. And first of all, we're going to create a section to create good semantic HTML. That section is going to have the classes of the color of the background, going to have some padding on it. All the text is going to be centered. Some padding on the x-axis, the height of the full screen, and the flex of columns, so that every item is going to be on top of each other. Next step, we're going to just add a text, an H2 bold and large, a description of welcome to the best game in the world, of course, and a paragraph where we're going to have a timer afterward. If we just save this and we go back, this is what we already have, just with a couple sections and Tailwind CSS. What we're going to add next is going to be the middle row where everything is going to happen. All of this is the top and the bottom. I'm going to add the game to the middle bit between the titles and the timer. We're going to add a new div, and that div is going to be a row this time. The item's going to be aligned between them, which means that they're going to have space between them, and they're going to be aligned center in the cross axis. To continue to add blocks, we're going to add the score for the first player. Notice that it's going to be hidden by default, and it's going to only be shown on screen sizes other than medium. This is also a Tailwind feature, and we're going to do this to make the game responsive for mobile. The next div is going to be where the board is going to be, with a specific width and height, make a square, and also the margins that we need. Then we're going to create the score for the second player. And finally, we're going to add again score for the first player, but on the responsive mode. Meaning that this is going to be by default shown on mobile and hidden in medium devices, which is inverse what's happening before. So they're going to counteract each other. If we now save all of this, this is what we already have. Now we just have to make this interactive, right? So let's start with the board. Currently we have an empty square. What we want is a 3x3 grid. So we're also going to take advantage of Tailwind CSS for that and their default grid column layouts directives. So let's start by saying that the board is going to be rendered by a function, which is going to be found in the Tic-Tac-Toe component. I'm going to call it render board. So let's create that render board function. So I'm going to create right here, render board. Inside a paragraph, of course, we need a tag board here. Let's see if we have the expected behavior. Yes, we do. Now we have to find a way to save our board status. So we have a 3x3 grid, and each of the elements of the grid can have a value of empty, player 1, or player 2. Now let's create a function that's gonna initialize the game state for us before we can render the board. I'm gonna call it reset game. What this function is gonna do is set our board array. This is gonna be an array of arrays. Each array is gonna be one of the rows of the game. We're gonna be using state for that. I'm gonna call it board. Initial state is gonna be an empty board. You can see here it's gonna be an array of strings. To initialize that game, we can just call set board. It's gonna be an array of 3 arrays, one for each column, of 3 columns of empty strings. It's gonna make more sense in a bit. So now our board is set. So what we can do now is come up to our render board function, start working our way down from here. We can delete the paragraph, and we're gonna start with the div. So for the container, it's gonna have our board. It is gonna have a full height of its parent and full width of the parent as well. I'm gonna give just a color for the background. It's gonna be white, and it is a grid. So now we have to define the size of the grid. So Tailwind works, we're gonna say it's a grid, and then we can call the directive of Tailwind to say how many columns it is gonna have. So it is gonna have grid columns 3 columns, and grid rows 3. I'm gonna have 3 columns and 3 rows, which is a match here of this board. So now what we can do is loop over that same board we have already set. Gonna be function is gonna be board dot map for each of the cell we have right there. Cell is also gonna keep the index. It's gonna come in handy later. First, it is a rows because it is an array of arrays. We're gonna for each row we have an index. And then for each of the rows, each of these arrays right here, we also gonna map that. And now this is gonna be the cell and the cell index. Each individual cell right here. So what we're gonna do here is return a div that is gonna contain each cell. For now, we're just gonna draw an O right here. We don't have values. We can add values. Let's add an X here. O here. Yeah, we first gotta put cell here to use the computed value. Okay, just some formatting. Let's see what we got. Okay, so we have nothing actually. And that is because we did set all this, render and reset of the game, but we have not called this. Our board at the moment is just this default empty. So what we're gonna do is use effect of React, which is going to be initialized once at start. What it's going to do is just call reset game. Import use effect. And save. It's going to complain that it was used before it was defined. So we are actually going to move this function up, and use effect stays below. So when a component initializes, it's rendered for the first time, it's gonna execute the use effect body, which is gonna be reset game, which in turn is gonna set the board to this default array. So now if we go back, we can see something, but barely. So let's go back to our cells we were creating right here and add some classes. We can see them there. And add border to it. And we're going to say their flex, and their content is in the middle. And we can see the text in the middle of each cell. If now we go back, this is where we already have. We have a grid of 3 by 3, and each cell is being rendered in its correct place. So now what we want to do. We want these individual cells to be clickable. And for them to be clickable, we need to add an on-click action to each of them. And we do that by, let me separate this right here, by creating an on-click to an HTML element. So on-click, what we're going to do is call a function called handle cell click. So whenever we click each individual cell, it's going to be calling this function that we have to define. So we're also going to define before this one, so I don't have a warning of being used before define. And it's going to be handle cell click. And we're going to type the argument it's going to receive. It's going to come in handy later as well. So for now, all we're going to do is to access the cell that was clicked from the event. It actually got a property called current target. This is why I love TypeScript. I'm just gonna log the target to the console. Here we have some accessibility warnings right here. We are gonna address them later. So if we go to inspect, not pretty at the moment, but if we go to the console, what we have here, the second warning is that each child in the list must have a key. Also going to add that later. If we click on a cell, we have access to it. We are logging an element we are clicking on. Let's continue. So let's address the items that we were given. For the key, we need to have a unique identifier. I normally like to create it at the top of the loop. We need to turn this into a function again, where this is return. ESLint is going to take care of this for us. Yeah. So I'm going to paste the identifier, and now we can use it. So I built it the following way. Just a string with the name of the cell, and then the row that it belongs to, and the column it belongs to. Now we can use this as an identifier. So one of the issues has been solved. Then to solve the accessibility issues, we're going to need to have at least one keyboard listener. In static HTML with even handlers require a role. So we're actually going to double this. On key down. Role is going to have the role of a button, and each cell is going to be clickable. And we have another one, elements with the button interactive role must be focusable. To be focusable, we need to add a tab index to it, so that when users just click on tab to navigate through the page, it's going to go from one cell to another based on an index. Index, I'm going to say it is 3 times row index times call index. It's going to give us a total of 9 by the time this is done. Now we have no errors, we can go back and everything still works the same. But now we have more information when we click on the cell. Since we have access to the div already, we can actually assign to the current target and destruct the property of an ID. Target is going to have an ID, which we have not added. We're going to add the same thing as identifier. Now we have the ID. Second thing I'm going to do is get the row index and the call index based on the ID of the div. How I'm going to do that is I'm going to create an array to be destructured on the return of the split function. So if I do id.split, I can split the string that represents the ID into any delimiter that I want. Since we are uniting the down here the cell, the row index, and the column index with dashes. That's what we're gonna add here. So by splitting in dashes, we're gonna have the cell string right here, which we don't want. That's why we make it underscore. And then we're gonna have the row index, it's in order, and then the call index. Call index. So the split returns an array with, I know that the array is gonna have 3 elements. It is gonna be splitting this string right here. So we're gonna have the cell index, the row, and the column. And we now have them right here. So now let's make the fun part, which is when you click on a cell, actually place the element on it. So we're just gonna clean the board up here. And we're gonna make a copy of the existing board. New board equals the board we already have. This is useful to break the reference between the variables. Because if we just did it this way, when you're going to change a new board, you're going to actually be changing the other one. Because the reference is kept between arrays and objects upon assignment. So if we do this, we are creating a completely new variable with a new reference based on the board variable that exists. So since now we already have a new board, we can actually manipulate it. I'm going to say that the board at row index cast into an integer. This is a string here, split returns strings. This is a split of a string, right? At the index of the column, also cast to an int, equals, let's just force it to be an O. Now that we have our new board, we can just call setBoard with our new board. React is going to make the magic for us, hopefully, and it's going to work first try. Our board is empty, because right here we emptied it by default. When you click reset game, now if you click on a cell, it draws an O in it. And now we are starting to get dynamic. Only let's make this more interesting. That O is actually ugly. It's just a string. Let's make it an image. So instead of text, we have images, we got assets we can use, and the assets are in the public folder to be accessed by the client. Go into public, go into images, we have these 4 images. X and O's, we have the black, we have the green, which we're going to be using a letter stage to identify the winner of that game and highlight their cells. So what I have already imported the assets into here, into our project. So let's now make them appear on the screen. So what we're going to do right now to start is, if the cell is different from empty, otherwise it is going to be empty, we are going to be rendering an image in its place. For now, the source of the image is going to be fixed for all of them. It's going to be images o dark.svg. And then we're going to add class name to it. And just so that image doesn't occupy the entire cell and we leave some padding to it, we're going to be using this tailwind directive, which is height. It's going to be 11 of 12. So it's 92%, something like that. Same thing for the width. And it's complaining that I need an alt. Okay, so it's cell identifier. Okay, let's see what we got now. Empty, because we on save reset the game, because the component re-renders itself. Now if we click, we start getting images. But all of them are the same player. All of them are O's. How are we gonna change players? Let's do something else. Back on the handle cell click, after we set the board, we're gonna call a function called updateGame. And we're gonna encapsulate here everything we need to change turns of the game. So let's define the function itself. Const, maybe before handle cell click, and it's gonna complain. Const update game close receives nothing. Gonna console log updated. This is gonna be called every time we click on a cell. But if you want to change players, you need to know which player is currently playing. And for that, we need a state to save it. Up here, together with the other state we already added, which is the board, we're going to add a player. Initially, we're going to start with a O for it, and then we're going to change to an X. So first things first, we're going to change to be start using this player right here. I'm going to start with an X. I believe X always starts. And here, when we are handling the cell click, instead of just placing the O, we're going to place the current player, whatever that is, an X or an O. And here as well, on the image that we're rendering when we click, instead of always being the same image, we're going to construct it. It's going to be images. Let's open here. It's going to be images at player. It's going to be XRO underscore dark.svg. Okay, so should still be working the way it was before, but now we can change players. So what we're going to do when we update the game is set player, update the player to be if current player equals O. I'm going to set the player to X. This is an question mark. If the player is O, it's going to be X, otherwise it is going to be O. And that's all we need. If we now go back, when you click first, it's going to be an X, because that's the default value we added. It is not. Okay, something is really wrong here. Oh, okay, my bad here. Because whenever we are rendering the image, I'm using the player of the current state of the game, and I'm not using the value of the cells. That's my bad. So now here is a cell of the player. Okay, go back, click, we get an O. Fine, it started with an O for some reason. X, O, X, O, X, O, X, O. So now at each click, we do change player, and the other player has a chance to play. And this concludes part 1 of this tutorial. We do have a tic-tac-toe game with a board where we can click and fill it up with images where each player can have their own. In the next video, we're gonna be checking for the winners or losers also, and be checking for draws and resetting the game when you find a draw. And we're gonna start keeping score of who won and who didn't. So be sure to subscribe to the channel so don't miss out when I release those videos. And if you have any questions of this part during your development, if you found some error or you're having some trouble, feel free to reach out to me either on the comments down below or on my socials, Twitter, or on the Discord channel. On the Discord channel, you can ask questions about any language that you're currently using. The community is gonna try our best to help you. So until the next video or the next part of this tutorial, I wish you happy coding. Now don't cheat and don't go into GitHub and copy the rest of it already.